Welcome to Tradies Who Lead, the podcast about everyday leadership for everyday legends. I'm Ashley Baltecki, a diesel mechanic by trade and your host. In this podcast, we hear from trade leaders from all industries and job titles about how they show up as everyday leaders so that we can learn from them and level up our leadership skills on site. In this episode, we cover why leaders need to invest in personal development, how to empower others to take on more responsibility, and the importance of great leaders in the trades. Adam Hall is the Managing Director and co-founder of AH Fencing, one of Australia's fastest growing commercial security fencing companies. With a vision to build the nation's first truly national fencing contractor, Adam has led AH Fencing from a small startup to a multi-state operation, delivering projects for Tier 1 builders, developers, and government clients. Under Adam's leadership, the company has achieved year-on-year growth driven by a culture of excellence, innovation, and strong client relationships. Passionate about leadership and culture, Adam is dedicated to developing high-performing teams and creating opportunities for people to grow as tradespeople and leaders. His philosophy of chasing perfection underpins both his business strategy and personal approach, inspiring those around him to raise standards and think bigger. Adam is also committed to shaping the future of the construction industry through mentorship, system innovation, and strategic national expansion. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today, Adam.
Thank you very much for having me.
How do you define leadership in your business, and what does it look like for the day-to-day at AH Fencing?
So I think leadership in our business specifically, and probably across all businesses, is defined by the way that you show up every day in the example that you set. You know, I think leadership is a personal thing, and the way that you show up is the standards that you set for the way that everyone else should or could show up as well. So for me, you know, and this has been a huge learning thing for me over the years, is I know the business and the leaders within the business will never outgrow where I'm at personally and professionally. And so, you know, the growth of our business that we've experienced has largely been a journey of personal development for me as a leader and as a human showing up in the day-to-day. And, you know, you might get lucky and you might get a really great leader join your business, but ultimately they're probably not going to hang around very long if they aren't following a great leader themselves. And I'm not saying I'm a fantastic leader. I'm still learning. I'm still on that journey myself, but it's definitely a daily practice. And the way that I show up definitely affects the way the rest of the team shows up.
I love that you really capture the complexity of the fact that leadership is as much personal as it is business, and that it really comes from this place of we've got to start with ourselves, especially if we want to set examples for other great leaders within a business or within a workplace. Where did your leadership journey begin? Was it with the start of your business, or did it begin sometime before that or sometime after?
I mean, I think in some ways I've always been a natural leader. And I say that in the sense that I've always been a very optimistic person and always talking about the positives and what might happen and what could happen and motivating people to see that. And so I think I've always been a natural vision maker, I suppose, and I've been good at rallying people behind a cause. And I thought that was sort of the extent of what leadership was, I suppose, when I started the business. And it's obviously a lot more than that. But I think that was step one of the business, was really creating an amazing vision and purpose that people want to get behind. Because a company is really just a group of people all on the same vision, same mission. And if you can't get people behind it, then you're not going to be able to grow a scalable company. I suppose to continue on that, like, you know, as the business has grown, it's just crazy the amount of personal growth that I need to have as well. I mean, it's, you know, I've had lots of challenges over the years where, you know, as the business has grown, I've had to handle more and more complex situations with different staff members. I've really felt not good enough, I suppose, as a leader. And, you know, the business certainly got to a point in the last couple of years where I thought, wow, this thing's really outgrowing me as a leader. And I started to look at, you know, hiring external leaders to come into the business, like general managers or construction managers or something like that. But ultimately, I sort of sat with it and realized, even bringing these amazing external leaders in, the business is still not going to outgrow where I'm at because they're not going to want to follow, myself if I can't continually grow as well. So that sort of led me down the path of getting a personal mentor and coach. And I don't think there is any distinction between your personal and professional development. We're just people, and they're all intertwined together. If you think you can separate work and life, I think you're probably wrong. And if you think you can go out and get on the beers every weekend and then show up as your best version of yourself at work and have a complete distinction between the two, I don't think you can. And so, understanding that the way that you show up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that's what defines you as a leader has been a huge epiphany for me.
I really appreciate your vulnerability because I think it's easy to look at someone, especially yourself. You have a very fast growing business, and from the outside, it'd be easy to think that, yep, Adam's someone who has it all figured out. But it is an ongoing journey, and there is self-doubts, and that is a natural part of the journey because we're psychologically wired to feel inferior. So it wouldn't be reasonable to think that those feelings go away, but how we respond to them is really important. Now, obviously you talk about having these other leaders that have come into your business to help it grow, and that's been the stage you're at. What strategies do you use to empower those leaders or your whole team to actually make decisions without needing your approval and your guidance every step of the way?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because it sort of, lends itself to what I was saying before, where it's really on me to empower and allow my staff to feel empowered. I definitely went down a path of micromanagement at one point in the business where, you know, I had a fear of losing control of everything that was going on in the business, and so I was trying to micromanage everybody. And by doing that, I was completely disempowering them, then taking away all their accountability. And I stepped back a lot, and that was from advice from my mentor and coach, and just allowed my staff to do their job and to be there to support and guide them when they needed. But I was still throwing in my 2 cents here and there, and it felt very helpful. I thought I was being helpful. I'd hear a situation going on in the office, and I'd just throw my 2 cents in. And I think naturally, the boss throws his 2 cents in, and the staff are generally going to try and take that on board. And I didn't realize that even just throwing my 2 cents in unprompted like that was actually taking away accountability from some of my staff and making their teams not feel like theirs. So I had a few project managers who were managing 10 or so guys on the tools, and they would be sort of leaning towards a decision, and I'd throw my 2 cents in, and then they might take on board some of what I've said. And then all of a sudden it's not their decision, which means it's not their team, and they don't really feel that accountable about it. And so I've realized that, yeah, even throwing my 2 cents in can be quite detrimental to empowering, our staff and our people. It's not to say that I can just completely let things go, but I've got to be here for support and guidance and sort of observation, I suppose. And it's the way that I go about that feedback now as well that has changed. It's less direct and more, coming from a place of curiosity and trying to get them to see my point of view themselves rather than me just jamming it down their throat.
That's a really great segue because my next question is very much around coaching, and obviously that sense of empowering someone and not micromanaging or over controlling how they act or the decisions they make in the workplace is kind of like the other side of the same coin of coaching. And that is, I guess, the active process of empowering those people instead of just the passive side of I'm going to step back so they can step up. But then if they step up, how do I help them step up potentially higher? So in terms of the way that you coach and mentor your team members from that role of helping them be more successful, what does that actually look like? What are the practical things you do or the actions you take to support them to be better in their roles?
So there's a framework that I love to use called be, do, have. And a lot of people want to have $1 million. They want to have the perfect body, and that's what. And they say once I do that, then I can be this person, or I'll be happy once I have that. And the be, do, have model is become the person or be the person so that you can do the things to have the thing that you want. And so that's the main thing that we're focusing on at AH Fencing is who do we need to be, and the doing and the having will take care of itself. So, my role in the business right now is the national construction manager. So I look after the construction side of the business, so delivering projects. And every week we have a construction meeting with all of our project managers. And the first topic of the meeting every week is a challenge and a win that you've had during the week from a leadership point of view. And it's not necessarily, oh, this supplier didn't deliver our materials on time. It's like, oh, I felt really triggered when, our site manager pushed back on my idea and I didn't really know how to deal with that. And then we sort of unpacked that as a team. And that's been a real game changer, I feel, because it's actually encouraged a lot of our staff to look inwards, I suppose, and stop looking at the external factors and start looking at inwardly at, okay, how did I show up in that situation? How did that make me feel? And how can I unpack that differently next time? Because, we've all got different lenses that we see the world through, and one bit of stimulus can happen and two people can interpret it completely differently. And that's just based on the experiences and things that we've had happen in our lives. And so it's understanding that, the way that we feel comes from entirely within us. Nobody else can make us feel something. It's even changing the way that we speak about things. And so instead of saying that made me angry, say I felt angry about that. It's that didn't make me feel angry. That didn't trigger me. That person didn't upset me. I felt upset. I felt triggered. And so it's that sort of coaching, which is like, I feel it's pretty deep in the construction industry, and it can be viewed as a little bit woo-woo sometimes, especially when, construction industry is a pretty male-dominant industry. And so trying to get some blokey blokes around talking about their feelings can be a challenge, but I try and lead with vulnerability to inspire that out of others. So generally I'll start the week and I'll talk about a challenge that I've had, and it's usually like, I went on a holiday recently, and the challenge I had was letting go and really just trusting the guys to deliver projects while I was gone. And the win was that I really sat with that and asked myself the questions around, do I think they're capable of that? And of course I did. And, it was an amazing sort of way to start a meeting. And then that allows the other guys to be a bit more vulnerable. And then by the time you get to the last person, they're sharing their heart and soul. So it's, that's the sort of coaching that I'm trying to implement. I wouldn't say we're all the way there. It's like some of it's aspirations, but it's it's definitely been a game changer.
And I can imagine there's a flow-on effect to the whole culture, because obviously you've spoken about the fact that you need to lead by example, and you need to kind of show that soft, vulnerable side to your challenges, even though you're the person in authority, and that creates an example that, there'll be a few brave people who do feel more comfortable sharing, so they'll start, but then there's this ripple effect and this flow-on effect where even in like one conversation, you've created the safe space where people are suddenly going, oh, I can share things that are hard and I'm not going to get judged, or I'm not going to get told off for my mistakes, and I can learn from that. And that then makes that conversation then flow into their teams and maybe how they approach the situation for other people within your business as well, I imagine.
Yeah, 100%. And, that just ties into that the business won't outgrow my personal development, because being vulnerable with the team at first was very uncomfortable for me, because for a long time, I felt like as the owner of the business, I had to have all the answers and I had to be the rock, and I had to, that was the only way that I was going to get people behind this purpose and vision, was like being this unshakable rock of a man. And, it took a lot to be vulnerable with the team at first. And through doing that, it made me more comfortable being vulnerable with the team. And then all of a sudden, I didn't have to have all the answers, and that weight was off of me as well. Now I can go to the team and say, hey, this isn't working, guys, and I don't have the answer. What do you think we should do? And all of a sudden, the pressure is not on me to solve all of the world's problems. I've got this amazing team around me. And then they do come to me with some incredible answers as well. And then that just builds that trust further and further. So yeah, like it all goes back to the business will not outgrow my personal growth. And it's been amazing to see some of the leaders within our business now handling situations differently. We had a site manager, and he, at the start of the job, like in the first 2 days, he'd always just have a bit of a shitty attitude. He'd be upset and he'd be snarky. And we used to just approach that with, like, God, he must have had a shit morning. But one of the project managers sat down with him and was like, "Hey mate, what's up? Like, why are you so upset about this?" And then he sort of shared with him, "Oh, I just feel underprepared when jobs start. I like to, he felt that same sort of thing where he needed to know all the answers. And on the first day or two of a project, when he's still wrapping his head around the scope and what needs to be done, he didn't feel that way. And so just our project manager recognizing that with him and saying like, "Hey mate, it's all good. Like, we're here with you as well. You don't need to know it all. We've got your back." That has repaired that relationship between that project manager and site manager so much, and they get on like a house on fire now. And it was just from looking at it from a different lens, as to what's going on with this guy, what might he be feeling that's making him act this way, instead of just he's a dick.
And I mean, it is easy sometimes to assume that, especially for people who sometimes, everyone knows that grumpy person or that quiet person or that person who might not be as friendly as others. And it's easy to stereotype, and that can sometimes make it easier on our brains, but then damage the relationship because we're not actually being curious about, well, what actually is the perspective of this person and what is actually going on in their lives. And unless we have those conversations and ask those questions, we never know.
Mm-hmm.
On LinkedIn, you talked about the need for great leaders in construction. What do you see are the top skills of a great leader?
It's a good question. Obviously, as I said before, like the top skills of the great leader are looking inwards and always looking to see what's holding you back in life. The theory that my mentor has given me is that we're all born perfect. We're all born as these perfect humans, and as life happens, we hold on and grab onto all these little bits of trauma and experiences that happen, and that's where all the "I'm not good enough" stuff comes from. And I think the best leaders are always looking inwards and looking to find those triggers, all those things that they're holding on to. And so the idea is that we are all perfect, and all we have to do is let go of these things that we're holding on to that are not allowing us to show up as our perfect selves. And I know that sounds really, really deep, but I think that's what the best leaders are doing. There's obviously a bunch of practical things you can talk about, like focusing on efficiencies and data and empowering a team and all that sort of stuff. But I think it all stems from, all of us as humans, like trying to unpack what we've held onto or what we've grabbed onto in our lives, that these thoughts and belief patterns that we've held onto growing up that no longer serve us anymore. They did serve us once upon a time. Between the age of 0 and 7 is when we're forming most of our beliefs around the world, and that's when we really hold on to all of these thoughts about "I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable," whatever it might be. And it's about recognizing those patterns and starting to let go of them so that you can show up as the very best version of yourselves, and then other people will see that and it will inspire other people to follow the same way. Like this is a podcast about leadership, and I have so much. I love data and I love practical. I love talking about how to build this and how to build that, and I could talk about that for hours as far as good leadership goes. But like, if you really want to boil down what I think good leadership is, then that's what it is.
Leadership can be complex, like we won't deny that, because like you said, there's so many factors in terms of managing people with different personalities, different understandings of situations, and it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to pick up on those nuances and to be curious about people, and then be able to regulate ourselves and be able to react in ways that we choose to react, instead of just reacting based on what our first feeling is or what our first thought is. But at the core of it, it can also be so simple. It really is. How do we show up as the best version of ourselves every day? And that's something that we don't need a title, we don't need authority to do. When it does come to some of those practical things, if we do have any business owners listening to the podcast, what would be 3 practical tips that help create a culture of empowered leaders across all levels of the business?
As far as practical things go, I read a book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why, and it's a great book around your purpose and vision for a company and a business. And it's, a lot of people talk about what they do in the business, like we build security fences, but not about why they do what they do, and giving people purpose and a vision and how to show up as a fantastic leader. And I think one of the huge practical ways you can show up as a great leader is by protecting your tribe. And so, our tribe is our company or whatever it might be. And it's protecting it from not only external threats, like not having enough work or not having enough cash, but also internal threats, which is, staff members who are not fitting the culture and the values of the business, and pulling them aside and having those chats. And ultimately, everybody's on their own journey, and we can show it with love and curiosity and try and help these people navigate through that. But sometimes we don't have that time in a business and people need to be moved on. So there's not only a lot of external threats to a business, but there's also internal ones. And the way that you handle those as a leader reflects to your team massively. And so we've had to let go of some people in the past who have been really fantastic people, love having a beer with them, but they're not showing up with the values that our business has. They're showing up late every day. They're not showing up in uniform, or the ute's messy, whatever it might be. And we obviously give a number of written warnings and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, if they're not doing that, it's dragging down the standards for the rest of the team. Or there's other people who might be doing it and then saying, why is he getting away with it? And so it's about being able to make those tough calls and having the discipline to do so, even when, on a personal level, like we've let go of some people that, like I said, I loved having a beer with, but ultimately they were an internal threat to the tribe and we had to let them go. And so, even right now today, we were talking about having a really tough conversation with someone who's been with the business for a long time, and we're going to approach that situation with curiosity and compassion, of course, but we could have definitely looked at the situation a lot more negatively and sort of had a go at them. So I think practically that's one thing. If you want to get some other things in there, know your numbers, 100%. Know your leading indicators, not just your financials, not just profit and loss, balance sheet. Know your leading indicators, so your KPIs. And so we've created KPIs and leading indicators around everything that's ever caused me stress in the business before. So whether that be not having enough work, not having enough staff, not having enough cash. So now we have leading indicators. Not having enough cash is debtor days. What's our debtor days at? Not having enough staff is how many interviews are we doing every month? Not having enough work is how many quotes are getting out the door. Like there's a bunch of leading indicators or KPIs that I know if we're hitting those numbers, I'm not going to be stressed in 6 months' time.
That's fantastic. So
that's another huge one.
Very much around having purpose for yourself, for your business, being able to have the hard conversations so that you protect the culture of your people instead of avoiding a difficult chat just because you get along with someone, and knowing your numbers, not just financially, but also knowing your numbers in terms of what actions do I need to take this day, this week, this month, so that I know that I have a sufficient pipeline of actions that I can achieve my business outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I could go for days. Like there's so much and it can be so specific, and it's hard sometimes giving general advice, but like I think that's some really great general advice, and it's about now applying it to your own business, because I'm a part of a few different business mentoring groups, and I've seen businesses come into these things for months and months on end and just get given absolute gold, and they come back month after month and haven't implemented any of it. So that's probably the third bit of advice, is make sure you implement good pieces of advice when you receive it.
Definitely. When we spoke about great leadership, you talk about leadership as the solution to this trade skill shortage. I couldn't agree with you more. But I'm curious to know that if we got leadership right in the trades, what does that actually look like across our industries?
I think if we get leadership right in the trades, it makes the entire industry better. It makes everybody enjoy showing up to work every day. It's massive. And if you look at the numbers, we have a trade shortage. We apparently need to build 1.2 million homes in the next 5 years to curb the housing crisis that we're having. So therefore, but at the moment we're on track to do about 900,000 homes. So we're going to be about like 30% short. And option one is to throw 30% more people at that, which is not an easy option, because we either have to import people to do that, in which case we need more houses, or we need to encourage more people, school leavers, to join the trades, which I think is a great solution. I think we can start on that track as well. But people aren't going to want to join the industry if we don't have great leaders in the industry, and it's not a great place to work in. And so if we look at our business at AH Fencing, last Christmas we had 50 staff. This leading into this Christmas, we also have 50 staff, but we've increased our revenue by 50% and our margins at as well. And so just in the space of a year, through a huge focus on leadership in the business, we've increased our efficiency by 50%. Now, if we can get every trade business across Australia to do something along those lines, we've solved the housing crisis and the trade shortage overnight. And all it comes is from attitude changes, and the way that we show up as leaders. We have the tools, we have the resources, we have everything we need. It's an education piece. I posted a post today about I have a vision for the construction industry where it's a place where everybody loves to come work. People are lining up to work here. Everybody gets paid on time. It's a great place to work, basically. And there's no denying everybody else wants that as well. There's so many comments and they're saying I share the same vision. And so it's not an attitude piece. It's not that people don't want it. It's an education piece. They're not exactly sure how to achieve it. And I think, and I can tell you think it as well, is that it's through great leadership. And so that's why I'm being so active on social media is, I'm trying to give inspiration to others to show up as great leaders. And I think it's one thing to post about it, but money makes the world turn. And so if I can post about it and also show that I'm running a super profitable, successful business off the back of it, and not only just profitable, but more profitable because of the way that the leaders in their business are showing up, it's even more inspiration for other people in the industry to do the same.
Yeah, there's definitely got to be that return on investment, which can be a hard thing to quantify when it comes down to our people skills. The final question I ask all our guests is, what's your advice to tradies about how they can show up as everyday leaders, even if they're not necessarily in that leadership position yet?
So everybody can show up as a leader every single day. As I've said, over the last 20 minutes, it's the way that you show up and present yourself every single day. And so, it's about getting to site 10 minutes early and getting your tools ready to go. It's about showing up in a nice, clean uniform. It's about showing up, having a nice, tidy you. It's about having a good attitude at work. We've spoken to some of our staff who were showing up with a bit of a shitty attitude and explained to them, some of the guys you're working with might have decided today, you know what, I'm going to have an awesome day. And they've rocked up and you've got a shitty attitude on and you're saying, nah, this sucks. I don't want to work today. And all of a sudden you've just ruined 5 other people's days. Now, of course you can be feeling bad, but there's a way to go about it. And it's not by sulking and moping around. And obviously, that's a way to show up as a leader, as like an entry-level person in the industry. And if you're one of those people showing up that way, you're going to be the person picked for promotions. You're going to be the person learning and growing the most, and you're going to be the person that excels through their career the fastest as well. And so just show up as the very, very best version of yourself that you can every day in every way that you think you can. Ask for help, be vulnerable, and just love the industry.
Thank you for everything you've shared, Adam. I've taken a lot away from our chat, and I love that you've been able to quantify the financial and efficiency impact of good leadership, and the fact that that's as much about your journey leading the way in your business as every other person who's following that journey with you. So I can't wait for all our listeners to hear this episode and learn from your wisdom, and definitely follow you on LinkedIn so they can keep learning from you as well.
Thanks, Ash. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed today's chat, please like this episode, subscribe to Tradies Who Lead, and follow us on socials for more content from your favorite guests. Thanks for joining me for this episode. Next episode is our season finale, so make sure you stay tuned for the final legend joining us on the podcast this year.